So the dreaded time has come. They've announced that the PS5 is not too far away, and for me personally, I think that there's never been a worse time to announce a new console generation, and for the vast majority of people, purchasing a PS5 would be completely pointless. But before you denounce me and angrily click off the video, please allow me to explain, and we'll discuss it in the comments below. So what marks Sony's almost hour-long presentation on the PS5 hardware and specifications, boiled down to essentially, is that the PS5 will have an SSD. And I say that because the majority of things that he was talking about beyond the capabilities of the SSD are things that are already sort of staple systems in video game design.
Pieces, and then do some calculations with sight lines and run speeds, like we did for Haven City when we were making Jak 2. The game is 20 years old, but not much has changed since then.
It's just that having an SSD will allow those systems to work much faster. And that leads me to the very first problem that I think a lot of Sony customers are going to have if they buy the PS5, and that is that pretty much everyone has complained about running out of hard drive space at some point or other on either the Xbox 360, PS3, Xbox One or PS4. With such a massive push towards digital games, which I assume is going to continue on into the next generation, how are we ever going to have enough space to fit our games on a single SSD? There's been news stories coming out that the PS5 will load games more than 100 times faster than the PS4 will. My 7-year-old PC can already load games that fast. After having discussed this a little bit online, some people have actually had a go at me for being part of the PC master race who thinks we're apparently better than everyone else, or being an Xbox fanboy. Because of course, this is just a green screen back here and actually there's a load of Xbox games behind this. But if we just try and speak as objectively as possible here, people really do, now more than ever, have really valid points when it comes to the capabilities of PC versus consoles. If Sony want to make SSDs a selling point of the PS5, they have to remember that with a PC you can obviously have an SSD, but you can also have a hard drive as well as that. So on my PC I can have a ton of older games installed on my hard drive because they load pretty fast anyway, whereas the newer games I'll install on my SSD. And it also meant that when I was playing and modding Skyrim, I could have all the mods stored on the hard drive, but then the actual game files themselves on the SSD so that they could load quickly. This all ties in with the main thrust of my argument really, which is that this all feels to me a bit too much like the benefits of having a new console are becoming so negligible that it's basically the same way people queue up and spend ludicrous money to buy the next iPhone every year just so they can take slightly better pictures and put them on Facebook. In terms of what actually matters, we would get barely any benefits from a PS5 at all, and what actually matters is the games. These are the Tomb Raider games on the PS1. 5 games from a relatively small studio. Every single one of these introduced new innovative gameplay ideas and gradually pushed the limits of both the engine and the hardware itself of the PS1. Here's Horizon Zero Dawn, but pretend for argument's sake that it's God of War, Sony Santa Monica's only game on the PS4. One game from one huge company. And while we're on the topic of Horizon Zero Dawn, a lot of the things that Mark Cerny was talking about in terms of software definitely applies to the Decima engine, which is an absolutely phenomenal piece of tech. So far we've only had 6 games use the Decima engine on the PS4, and that's from multiple different companies. The company that actually developed the Decima engine has only had 2 games on the PS4. Imagine how many more amazingly well crafted and beautiful looking games such as Horizon Zero Dawn could be created just on the PS4 if more companies got involved and more companies made the games and focused on developing for PS4 for a bit longer. Because one of the major takeaways I had from Horizon Zero Dawn, despite me absolutely loving it, was that the stealth absolutely sucked. The AI was incredibly primitive. Basically, you could see in the game from an ability that the character has that they all have these set paths. And the AI will literally follow those paths, walk around in circles, and are seriously not very sophisticated at all. As I've said many times on this channel, AI is what needs to be worked on if we're to see significant innovations in gameplay. The people that are looking at the specs of the PS5 and drooling, and having a go at me for feeling like it would be a complete waste of time and money, they are clearly still stuck in this mindset that graphics are this hugely important thing. That's a mindset that we had in the PS1 era in the 90s, when games like the original Tekken were seen by the official PlayStation magazine as utterly revolutionary. When actually looking back, the gameplay is insanely slow and clunky as hell. Ridge Racer, the first racing game on the PS1, had one track. It had one track, think about that. But it was still praised to high heavens because it was pushing graphical fidelity at the time. I feel like the three best games I've played in recent times, other than games in the Yakuza series, are Factorio, Undertale and Banished. 3 PC games, 2 of which obviously have a massive potential for modding, and Factorio lives up to that potential and has an amazing modding scene. Needless to say, the graphical fidelity in these games are nothing to shout about, but the gameplay and the innovation is there. The technical prowess of the Factorio dev team is actually really impressive, and that's made clear if you read their regular devlogs. They're always tweaking things and making the code and the graphics engine more sophisticated and efficient, but the core gameplay ideas will always be intact. For those that didn't know, the technical side of Undertale also has a few surprises in store as well. Toby Fox wrote a code that would essentially make it look like the game had crashed, but then it reboots itself at a certain point. That's technically impressive, yeah, but the real impact comes with how that ties in to the themes of the game. What it boils down to is that having an SSD in the PS5 will not give us any of those kinds of experiences. That lies with the developers. And to reiterate, when we have things like the Decima engine, which runs perfectly well on the PS4 and is capable of so much more than what it's been used for, then why shouldn't we give PS4 just a little bit more time before moving on and needlessly spending more money just because something's shiny and new? As you can see, I have mainly PS1 and PS2 games behind me. I have about 60 PS3 games and less than 20 PS4 games. And I think there's a reason for that beyond new games simply being expensive. I think it's mainly that I focus heavily on gameplay and what can actually be achieved even in a limited engine and on PS1 hardware. Just as another example, Metal Gear Solid 1, think of all they achieved in that limited engine. And then think of the huge strides we took when that moved on to Metal Gear Solid 2, and suddenly we could shoot every individual pot and pan and glass bottle in the canteen in the tanker level. We're simply not going to see those kinds of strides between the PS4 and the PS5, especially when there's such a heavy focus on load times and graphics. And that's why I certainly do not need a PS5. Anyway, now I've blurted out my opinions, let's hear yours down there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.